Do you know what the top 3 tips are for improving staff engagement and staff productivity and well-being in a business? Then this next video is just for you. Hope you enjoy. Hi, my name's Rob Goddard. I'm a serial entrepreneur and I'm doing a series of videos having a chat with fellow business owners, interesting people doing interesting things. So today, Colin Newbold. Hi, Colin, welcome.
Thank you.
And so Colin's involved in a very interesting space, which helps transforms leaders and managers. There you go. I've set you up there. Perhaps you could explain what you do, the company, and how you're different.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I would say that the company I run is called TLC Online, and I'm the founder of that organization. We have a product called click-360.com. Now, that is a 360-degree feedback platform, and we sell services and we sell the programs around that. And I would suggest that the programs that we run are different because we have come from an HR development background rather than an IT background, which is sadly what a lot of our competitors have, where they've come from. And I think that gives us an edge because, first of all, we've designed the platform from a practitioner's perspective. I think that's really important. We actually got a whole bunch of coaches together when we put this together, when we designed it, and we built it in a way that works not only for the coaches that have to work with the 360 reports at the end, but also for the participants and raters who have to actually complete the questionnaires and the participants who get the reports at the end. So we've made it into a pretty user-friendly process and report. And one of the main differences, I think, between our platform and others is that when you're quite high up in an organization and you've been selected by more than one of your colleagues to provide feedback to them, you are typically facing the prospect of doing multiple questionnaires, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depends on the size of the implementation. But it's a lot of work for a more senior person to have to do. And one of the things that we did when we set out to design this product was build a simultaneous rating platform, which means that rather than having to do one questionnaire, close it down, open up the next one, close it down, rather than do all that, which takes forever, we allow the participant, the rater, to put all of those people on one screen. And it just makes life so much easier, quicker. And also it kind of improves the accuracy because when they're looking at all these different people, they're thinking in relative terms between each of them when they're awarding scores and writing comments. And that's something you can't do if you're doing one at a time.
Yeah.
So, we call it simultaneous rating, and it's unique.
I'm interested to know, what was the trigger that moved you away from the traditional HR space into what is a tech-enabled solution? Was there a particular trigger?
Yeah. I think the trigger is simply that I saw some early results. This is in the back in the good old days with Excel spreadsheets and things. And I saw some early results. We started to introduce the concept. By the way, 360 is not new. It's been around for many, many years. As most things in business psychology, it's come from the States. But about 30 years ago, we started experimenting. I was then running an HR development organization, a leadership development organization. And what we noticed was that this was a tool that seemed to be waking people up. It seemed to be unlocking the blocks that had prevented them from growing as leaders and managers. So I felt that it might be worth focusing on this aspect of leadership development. And I now believe, with the experience we've had, that you don't need to spend money on a complicated leadership development program where you take people, out of their work, put them in a residential place for 2 or 3 days. I've done all this, by the way. I used to.
So have I. Yeah, NatWest Bank had it for a week at a really nice country mansion in Oxfordshire.
I know the place.
Haythrop Park.
I know the place. I never actually was invited to lecture there myself, but yeah, I mean, we used to run those kinds of workshops,
Yeah.
and typically they were very effective for a few days, maybe weeks if you were lucky. But then once people got sort of sucked back into their business as usual,
Yeah.
it didn't really make a significant and lasting change in their behaviour. So what I noticed was 360 did. It seemed to unlock the potential that lay within a lot of these people. We can't help everybody, as you can imagine, but an awful lot of the people that we work with start off being pretty resistant to the process and then end up being absolute fans of it.
Well, that was going to be a question as you were speaking there. In your experience, how open are leaders and managers to receiving feedback from their team?
Well, it varies, as you can imagine.
That's very diplomatic.
Um,
Let's call it.
I'm thinking of an example of this well, we started the process a couple of weeks ago, but I was actually talking to them this week on Monday. What happened was that we had a cohort of seven leaders, all senior managers, including the CEO. And there was obviously one of them that was pretty resistant to the process. And I know this because when I start processes, our organization will run very often, if we're allowed to, we'll run an awareness presentation. And this guy was on the awareness presentation, and I could see he was completely closed, and even though I gave everyone an opportunity to raise any concerns or anxieties, he said nothing. But in the process, it's turned out that he's not done the first step, which is to nominate anybody to give him feedback. So that's pretty obvious he's not engaged. So in the end, I had a one-on-one with him.
Right.
And it was so interesting. He's had a very bad experience in the past with a 360. Well, it was something very similar. And he's very fearful. And he's obviously not displaying great leadership capability right now. And he's got some relationship issues. And I did say to him that I think this would be the key to unlock those relationship blockages. And I managed to persuade him to get engaged. But yeah, you do get a lot of resistance. I say a lot. It's the minority. I'll tell you what the difference is: emotional intelligence. I think you've probably heard this, Rob, along the ways, but nearly every leadership guru now is saying that what is making the difference between the best leaders and the not so good leaders is emotional intelligence. Forget their competence, their functional capabilities, etc. Those are a given. You don't get to that role if you don't have the skill. But it's the bit that is often known as the soft stuff. I actually think it's called the tough stuff. But it's the bits that relate to how somebody sees themselves, the self-awareness, and also how how their behavior impacts other people. And so many leaders are unaware and don't care about the impact of their behavior on others. And that's the bit that I think makes the difference. So where we get a leader that comes into the process with high emotional intelligence, it's a dream. And they still learn stuff. Where they have no emotional intelligence, it's more difficult.
I think you're spot on there. I've always said in a recruitment mode, I'd always go for someone that has the right attitude and soft skills, because the technical skills you can train in over a period. Because someone who's got the technical skills but is useless with people, they can be a nightmare in an organization. They can really, right. And yeah, they've got they've got the qualifications, the technical background, but actually they can't work with people.
I'm thinking of an organization as you speak. I'm thinking of an organization. We're not actually working with them, but I know about the organization, and people are leaving in droves right now.
Right.
It's not a fantastic labor market right now, but people are still leaving this organization because of the guy at the top. He needs to get out of his own way.
Yeah,
but
we might be
I better
thinking
not
about
say
the
any
same
more. I'll reveal too much.
Shall we move on?
We better move on.
Top 3 tips to looking at the positive. What are 3 things that a leader or manager, business owner can do from tomorrow to help improve that staff engagement, interpersonal, interrelational things within a business that makes a company really sing and on fire? Top three things from your experience?
Top three things, I would say the first one is so simple and straightforward, but sadly lacking in many leaders, and that's to acknowledge people as you walk into the building. I mean,
Right.
I know that's slightly more complex with so much homeworking going on, but you
Mm,
know, in the old days, a lot of leaders just ignored staff. They walked to their office or whatever, and
true.
very rarely acknowledged their existence. And I think you can do the same by email or you can do it on Zoom, but it's just actually recognizing people, um, praising them for a job well done would be my second thing.
Yeah.
In other words, to quote the famous Ken Blanchard, wrote the 1 Minute
Indeed.
Manager book,
Yeah.
catch people doing things right, not wrong. Um, yes, of course, there are opportunities and occasions where you're going to need to address poor performance, but the most important thing is acknowledging people, catching them doing things right. Now, the other thing I would say is that one of the things I've learned about good leadership is a pretty uh, large dose of humility.
Right.
A lot of leaders seem to have left that behind somewhere along the ways. And I would suggest that a bit of humbleness is not a bad attribute
Mm,
for a leader to have. And the third thing I would say is to stay curious. And by that, I mean, be interested rather than interesting, if
yeah.
that makes sense. And when I talk about being curious, I'm talking about asking the right questions. And more than that, listening to the answers and maybe
Right.
progressing or actually dealing with the responses that you get. So those three things: acknowledge people, catch them doing things right,
Yeah.
um, have a bit of humility, and the
Take,
third thing is staying curious.
yeah.
Because that is a fantastic. When people feel that you care, you're interested, they open up. That's how you get followers.
Yeah, it resonated what you said about management by walking around years ago when I worked in NatWest Bank. You are right. The bank managers, we had three in one of the larger branches. They used to go into their offices, never acknowledge people in the open office, apart from maybe the manager's clerk, who they did most
Yeah.
of the interaction with. But that was it. And you felt isolated from the people running that business unit. Um, Someone did read, one of the managers, won't mention his name in case he's still alive, but he'd been on a course probably at Haythrop Park for a week um, about management by walking around and making yourself visible. So he used to do that, but he got caught out because in a hallway he had a list of paper. He had people's names and what they did, and maybe their wife's name or husband's name, and maybe their dog's name. He didn't know his staff,
That's terrible.
but he got caught out by a member of staff. Of course, that gets round like wildfire.
Yeah, it just
That he's
completely
only
destroys his image.
destroys it because he's not doing it out of a authentic motivation.
As a past mentor once said to me, Rob, it's hard to be sincere when you're not.
So what are the, just developing that thought process that you've shared there, what are the common pitfalls, other than what you've mentioned there, that you find leaders and managers of businesses fall into with quite common frequency?
I suppose I would summarize the most common pitfall as ego, you know, because I think a lot of these guys at the top, um, I have to say, by the way, I think this is generation specific. So I'm afraid I'm of that generation that I'm talking about, and I'm not unique. I'm in a generation where the majority of board members in the majority of organizations are, to quote another mentor, male, pale, and stale. And
I haven't heard that before.
yeah,
That's
yeah. and I'm afraid, that I'm in
Yeah.
danger of being in that group. But when they get to the top, they somehow seem to think they're the king of the mountain, and as a result, nothing that could possibly damage or threaten or challenge that ego um, is allowed in, and I think that's a real issue. Um, but I have to say that even if you can't work with these people, if you can't get them to change, they're not going to be around for much longer. The people that are succeeding them, the people coming up, the 50-year-olds, are much more aware of all this stuff, and I think they avoid that pitfall. They're much more humble, for example, in my experience. In other words, I said it before, they have a much higher degree of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I think that's the best thing we can do is keep working on emotional intelligence. Yes, of course, we've just said it. We've said all this before. I don't want to repeat myself, but technical skills and functional skills, they're a given. You don't get to be the top of something unless you've got that. But it's the emotional intelligence that's missing. So the biggest pitfall, I think, has to do with ego, lack of emotional intelligence, um, lack of care
Yeah.
about human beings.
Human beings.
I hear that in the lockdown, this pandemic that we've all been having to grapple with, there's been this huge increase in managers reaching out to teams, usually like this on a some sort of video meeting platform,
Yeah.
and trying to stay in touch and so on. And I think the idea that they have in their head is that I need to look after my staff. I need to keep in touch. I need to keep communicating. Unfortunately, I don't think they're doing it in the right way. Even the 50-year-olds, and the ones below. That what we're talking about is mental health. Mental health issues are on the increase with this way of working. People are stressed out of the water. One thing I've noticed about people working from home is that although they may not work the same hours that they would have done in an office, they're actually working more hours um, because they're working at night, they're
Yeah.
working early in the morning, just trying to manage life as well as work, the so-called work-life balance. And in order to do that, actually, they're working harder. They're working more hours. They're actually more productive as a result, but they're stressing themselves out of the water. And I think the idea of leaders keeping in touch is great, provided that they are sincere and authentic about the care they show to their staff.
Yeah.
And there's 100 different ways you can do that, but to be honest, emotional intelligence is probably the box in which they all sit.
Yeah. Yeah. And as long as they don't have a list of their staff members' name, lest they forget.
Exactly.
I, you are interesting. I mean, you know, the world that I've occupied for the last 20 years is selling businesses, and the
Yeah.
same pitfall, the same barrier gets in the way of selling a business, which is ego.
Yeah.
And
I can believe it.
most, I would say the majority of businesses that I've been involved in selling, the owner is alpha male type, definitely confident about their own abilities, and I think that's an attribute actually when you're doing a startup, is to believe in yourself. But of course, it can grow out of hand, and I've often described the community of people that I've had the privilege of serving for as they are a legend in their own lunchtime. They've created an environment that they are. You mentioned about sort of king of the hill. They've created an environment that they can largely control and influence. And that gets in the way sometimes of selling a business because they don't want to give that up and become an average
Yeah.
Joe.
Do you know what? You've hit upon a point, Rob.
Yeah.
In being in control is very important, to people. Being right is very important to some people. I remember once going, I was a participant in a workshop where the tutor said, he picked on this guy who was really obnoxious. I mean, he was really up himself,
Right.
and he said to him, you know what? He said, when you die, your funeral's gonna be nobody. But it won't matter, because on your tombstone, it will just say, I was right. And I thought to myself, yeah, that sums up this thing about ego, this thing about control. So much of that is wrapped up in the identity of these leaders. And I think when they let go of all that, do you know what? They feel so much better. They live longer. But it's not a level of awareness that everyone gets to.
No, it isn't. And I've always said the most valuable companies and the ones easiest to sell are the ones where the owner has made themselves redundant from their own business, because they've delegated, upskilled, and empowered the people working within the firm.
Sure.
But they still own the equity. So what a perfect life. So
I'm working towards it myself, Rob.
I know that. I know you've got an ever-growing collection of cars, which is not the subject of today's chat. But if you're a petrol head like me and Colin, do get in touch with Colin on that side. He's got some very interesting vehicles. Anyway, what's the best way if someone wants to have a chat with you, Colin? What's the best way to get hold of you?
I would ask if they could email me directly.
Okay.
It's a very easy email address. It's CPN, so Charlie Papa November, they're my initials, at click-360.com.
That's right. And it's actually on your Zoom profile. So
yeah,
yeah,
indeed.
Yeah. So do get in touch with Colin.
Yeah, I welcome any inquiries direct into my inbox.
It's a really interesting space that he's in, and actually more than that, it's invaluable to any business in any industry of any size, because we're affected by some universal things. So thank you, Colin, for sharing your wisdom that you've built up over the years in this space. It will be invaluable to many, and I do thank you for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity, Rob. I really appreciate it. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Likewise. Take care.
Bye.